Hare Krishna, my friends, new and old, young and bold. Today, we're going to have a good time. Episode 6 of Sunday is My Fun Day. Ego Booster. Real ego and igniting our free will to the max, the full scope of our free will. So I want to start by saying all glories to all the previous acharyas, back to Lord Brahma and Lord Sri Krishna, all glories to all the devotees present, and all glories to all living beings and all living entities. All glories to Goloka Vrindavana and this world, which is the perverted reflection of Goloka Vrindavana, and all the beings within both realms. So, we keep hearing all the time about this thing called, well, I guess I should start by saying, whenever somebody gives a presentation on false ego or real ego, they always tend to associate the word ego by itself, when it doesn't have the word real before it, with automatically referring to false ego. And I'm noticing this trend both among Krishna devotees and also among people who aren't Krishna devotees, obviously, because outside of Krishna consciousness, pretty much the whole world, more or less, only has one idea of what ego is, and that's the false ego understanding, which is ahankara. So false ego is a thing in the sense that it's an illusory temporal thing. It's not a real thing, actually. No, that's why it's called false ego, because it's not actually ego at all. In fact, it has nothing to do with ego. That's why it's called ahankara, the false ego, perverted reflection of actual ego. So I'm changing this paradigm. So the word ego, whenever I say ego by itself, I'm always referring to real ego. So if I say ego, or if I say real ego, I'm referring to the same thing. False ego, I will always specify a false before it. False ego, okay? So just a heads up as I go on in these presentations. So when I say ego by itself, I'm talking about the real ego. That's what I'm talking about, because that's what ego actually is. So let's work together and let's all change what this word means back to its original meaning. So the version that's hankara, not ahankara, the actual ego, or whatever the actual Sanskrit definition or word people prefer to use for that. You guys get what the point is. You guys get what that is. So, in other words, ego is a very good thing. It should always be embraced, actually. And in fact, the entirety of Krishna consciousness is about boosting your ego. Yes, I'll say that again. The entirety of Krishna consciousness is about boosting your ego. Yep, that's true. That's correct. So, don't buy into this garbage that people are throwing around and spreading around, trying to indicate that you have to do something along the lines of specifically making work or effort, okay, as a separate endeavor, as a specific endeavor to throw off the false ego. This is completely ridiculous, this idea, and doesn't work. And you can see that this won't work in your life if you try to do this either, simply because the false ego simply naturally falls off without any separate effort whatsoever on your part by you engaging fully in your real ego, boosting that every day and obsessing on your real egoistic tendencies. So yes, be egotistical. Yes, be obsessed with yourself. Be self-centered. Yes, be all these things. To the extreme, in fact. So that therefore, because there becomes a certain point where you become so selfish and so obsessed with what you desire that it naturally leads you back to Goloka, because you become now obsessed with the self of yourself also, which is Radha and Krishna. And by becoming obsessed with the self of yourself, by being supremely selfish in every way imaginable, you then are freed from the false ego naturally, without having to separately put work into it. And by embracing your natural eternal tendencies, you are inspired in the practices of celibacy, the regulations and stuff like this. This is a side effect, actually, of inspiration from tapping into your real ego. So you'll notice that I will cover this topic very differently from how you've seen it covered up to this point within the entire fold of Krishna consciousness. And this is how I will eternally present this topic, because it's very significant that everyone understands their infinitely unique value. Okay? So we've discussed this as a principle in every single video chat we've had so far. But I want everybody to really focus on not only not only just understanding that this is a fact, but really actually focusing on boosting your ego, your real ego, like actually focusing on that as a concentrated thing, okay? Because what's been going on throughout ISKCON and throughout the other sampradayas and throughout, I should say, throughout the Gaudiya sampradayas and other sampradayas, and the reason for all of this, like interpersonal abuse, people feeling isolated, people feeling lonely, alone, all this other stuff going on in ways that cause depression. Those things are all related to the individuals on some level or another not feeling as valuable as they actually are, and or believing that focusing in some other direction aside from your actual personal value is actually what you should be focused on. This has happened due to a skewed and very twisted understanding of what selfless service actually is, quote unquote selfless. So please understand this. These English words selfless and selfish, they're just really English words, and neither of them actually have the full scope of definition we're talking about here. We're talking about, so when we're talking about self-realization, we're talking about self-centered realization. Now, in the modern world, and throughout much of history, people have wrongly associated self-centeredness with the identification of illusion. So in the sense, they wrongly have associated that with, oh, I'm so great, I'm better than you, I'm superior to you, I'm this, I'm that, etc. That's what they have wrongly associated self-centeredness with. That's not self-centeredness at all, actually. That is actually simply what in Sanskrit is called ahankara, and roughly translated into English as the false ego. But it's not actually the false ego really either, because it has nothing to do with ego at all, actually, that principle. That principle actually has to do with you just simply being absorbed in illusion. It doesn't really have much to do actually with your ego. And because here's the thing, self-realization means what? It means you realize your eternal form, your eternal personality. It means you realize your eternal ego. And you embrace that and fixate on that. Because by fixating on your real eternal ego at the same time, what's happening at the same time as you doing that, and vice versa, is you're obsessing more and more on loving service to Radha and Krishna. Okay? So, people understand when you say selfless service, meaning basically doing things without consideration for your own sex gratification, or for your own sense gratification in general, where your entire focus is on giving pleasure and love to others as 100% of your focus, specifically Radha and Krishna, and then all the living beings, as well as Radha and Krishna, simultaneously. So when we say selfless service, but the problem is people are getting the wrong idea, because it's not actually selfless in that, because your real ego is involved in that. Like, so you have to be appreciative of your real ego being involved in that process, in the sense that, because people, and this is where these terms that we use tends to leave people with these impersonalistic, like, tinged things in the back of their heads, like we always talk about again and again. So that word selfless, as it's used in these connotations, tends to leave people with, once again, those impersonalistic floating around ideas in the back of the head, where, yes, I will be very clear about this. It's also impersonalistic to fixate completely on giving service to Radha and Krishna and other living beings without at the same time understanding your real ego in that process and appreciating your real ego in the process. So basically focusing on Radha, Krishna, and others, but ignoring, more or less, your own eternal real gratification. Now, I'm not talking about your own personal gratification in the sense of directing your focus towards your gratification. I'm talking about the importance of your gratification eternally, okay, in Goloka, the importance of that in the process of your loving service to others. So this is why I don't like to use the word selfless, because it gives people a wrong idea and wrong understanding of what pure devotional service actually means, okay, in this regards, and pure giving actually means, okay, because for that act to take place, there has to be the giver, okay, the one consciously engaging in giving loving affection to others. So, and of course, welcome Matt, and welcome Aiden. Good to have you with us. But so yeah, the thing is, welcome Ishvara Najani. This is very important to remember, okay, because what's been going on in all these different sampradayas And many gurus who are otherwise sincere and genuine have also been unknowingly, unintentionally misleading their disciples by teaching them with good intentions, okay, about giving loving selfless service to Radha and Krishna and other living beings. So their intentions are right, but they've been wording things in ways and relaying concepts in ways that cause depression for the people listening to them on a subconscious level, in the sense of, okay, those persons actually not fully appreciating and grasping what their real ego is and who they actually are and how valuable they individually factually are, okay? So in the course of those types of preaching, what tends to happen is the individual tends to feel less important, okay? Okay, you're just another living being amongst the rest of them. Yeah, we're all infinitely unique, but at the end of the day, you're just, no, that's not supposed to be the focus. The focus is on you yourself, and your infinite uniqueness is supposed to be your focus in Krishna consciousness, along with you engaging in giving purely to others, okay? In the way that actually fits your eternal preference, all right? So an individual cannot lovingly serve others or causelessly serve them if the acts that they're performing are not according to their eternal inclination in Goloka, okay? So the way you serve others and give that loving service to each individual has to be in line with your eternal form, your eternal personality, your eternal preferences. Because if it's not in line with those eternal preferences, then those acts of so-called loving service, pure service, can never be purely loving or purely affectionate, no matter what the acts are. And if you try to make them purely loving and affectionate, they're simply going to be acts of artificial attempts at purely loving, affectionate giving, okay? So don't waste a single second in your life, ever, on specifically trying to look at it from the perspective of, okay, I'm going to focus on getting rid of my false ego and throwing out the false ego. No, never look at it like that. That's all that's going to do. I can guarantee you this 100%. It's going to cause you depression. It's not going to work in the long run, and it's going to come back and backfire on you later, because you're focusing on something that isn't actually real to begin with, okay? You have to focus on what is real for the false version to just fall off by itself. So in fact, there's actually no such thing as getting rid of the false ego or renouncing the false ego. There's no such thing as that, because the false ego isn't there to begin with, and you are the real ego. Like, that is actually your identity, the eternal, pure ego, okay? The eternally, infinitely unique ego, right? That is you eternally, and that is each of us eternally, which is distinct for each of us, okay? None of us are the same. Never have been, never will be. So we're the same, united in general, ultimate, overall purpose. That's it. That's the only sameness living entities have ever had and ever will have. We're only united in the same very general, overall purpose, which is giving pure love to Radha and Krishna and all living beings. Okay? But as far as the details go, that is the point of Krishna consciousness. It's about all the details regarding your own individual self. Okay? That's what the entire process is about, of getting back to that consciousness. It's not about getting back to the generalized thing, which we already know about, which is loving service to everyone purely, specifically Radha Krishna, their forms, and everyone else. But once again, that's the overall generalized thing that we're all united on. How we exactly go about that, how we prefer to go about that, what our natural inclinations thereof are, okay, differ vastly between each individual. So this actually does translate to physical activities in this world, and this is actually the purpose of the Varna system also, which is another topic we discuss elsewhere. But so what I'm saying is, because I'm noticing this has been going on, and this really does need to change, and I'm changing it now. So because people just assume when they see the word ego or anything related to ego that it's automatically has to do with the falsely egoistic, cocky attitude type stuff, and the false pride and all these other things. That's not what ego is. It's not what it's ever been. So, but ego is, and always has been, each individual valuing themselves infinitely so. So this valuing of yourself infinitely so, to the degree that you value Radha and Krishna, yes, you need to appreciate yourself to the degree that you appreciate Radha and Krishna and other living beings. So there's no meaning to pure loving devotional service unless there's 3 factors involved. Okay? Pay attention very closely. Pure loving affection for Radha and Krishna in the way you feel about them. Okay? Pure loving affection for each and every single other unique living being aside from yourself. Pure affection for them. Okay? And then the third is absolute, intense, pure affection for yourself, your real ego, also. If any of those 3 are missing, you cannot reattain Goloka and attain perfection, and you cannot even attain happiness or peace of mind in this world. Nor can you attain the fulfillment of your desires fully, either temporally or transcendentally. Because what's been happening in ISKCON and in most of the Sampradayas up to this point is they've been dealing only with the first 2, but they've been leaving out severely the deep, real valuing of one's individual self. That's the part they've been leaving out, missing out. And once again, this has happened from well-intentioned people, but what's been going on is that because they're leaving that part out of the teaching. They're leaving that part out because this is what Radha and Krishna actually do teach, valuing the self like this, along with loving pure service to others. Devotees have been wrongly associating valuing oneself and thinking about one's eternal ego as mixed devotion. No, that's not mixed devotion. That's actually part of what pure devotion is. And that's how you actually realize your eternal form, eternal personality, etc. They've been wrongly associating valuing their eternal real ego with some degree of mixed devotion, some degree of sense gratificatory focus in the temporal state. No. Mixed devotion simply involves you focusing temporally in the illusory manner on your sense gratification as your focus, as your main focus, mixed in with your desire to serve Radha and Krishna and all living beings and attain realization of yourself. It's referring to that side of things. It's not referring to you valuing your real ego, your actual self. Now, remember, being real with yourself is very important. What this means is being real with what desires you have, okay? Both your illicit temporal desires and your transcendent pure desires or inclinations. Or I should say your pure drive and your perverse drive. You have to be real with both of them, okay, in order to achieve success. Now, being real, what that means is honestly analyzing your self-situation, but don't ever look at yourself from a depressed-like manner. Just honestly analyze, okay, what is it that I'm actually desiring, okay? Just be very simple about it. And what you're actually desiring is real, okay? Because that's your choice, that's your preference, that's what you're going towards. Now, we're going to shift now into the discussion on, related to this topic, I think everybody understands this by now, what's really going on here with the ego thing, and why this is so important actually, to not give up, but to embrace fully and indulge in real ego, okay? But now we're going to talk about free will and why people have been having this really wrong idea of what limited free or so-called limited free will is. So once again, like most people are thinking of Jivatmas or living entities as infinitesimal, insignificant little dots of consciousness, which is not the case at all. They're actually infinitely unique, beyond space and time, beyond size actually, beings. And then we talked about the whole size thing, as it only relates to the temporal body's coverings of the Jivatma's consciousness. It's not referring to the actual eternal size of the Jivatma at all. Because you can't have a size measurement for something that's beyond space and time. Just like you can't measure Krishna's size because it's beyond space and time. You can't measure our size individually either because we're beyond space and time. So if somebody thinks that the living entity is actually literally 1/10,000th the size of the tip of hair in Goloka, if they believe that they're that size in Goloka or in the spiritual transcendent world, then they're literally thinking that the living entity still in their transcendent state is still bound by space and time. Where just like 2 verses before, it's specified very clearly you're beyond space and time. So beyond all concepts of size. That's what it means. So now I'm sure everybody in our association understands very clearly now that the living entity is infinitely unique, and that's what it means to be a Jivatma. It doesn't mean anything other little thing. It has nothing to do with insignificance in the sense of lack of importance. No. Prabhupada only worded it that way and explained it that way so that people got out of the falsely egoistic ideas towards the living entity, that's all. So that but we're talking about specifically the nature of the living entity. We're not within the realm of false ego ideas of that entity anymore. We're within the realm of the actual living being. So free will isn't actually limited in the sense that people think it is. So your free will isn't quote unquote limited. In other words, so people ask, okay, well, if we actually have free will, then, people coming into Krishna consciousness will ask this. Well, if we actually have free will, then why are we limited? So why do we have to pray for things to be fulfilled? Why do we have to ask this? Why do we have to go through all these big, long, elaborate processes, spiritual, for our desires to be fulfilled? Most people erroneously will then think, but what I'm saying is, what most people will erroneously think, or I should say, they'll only see part way into this, in the sense that they'll assume and think that the living entity has limited free will because they're a living entity, as like some default principle or something, just because they happen to not be Krishna, and because Krishna has, but that's only like a little tidbit, little part. That's not actually what the case is. No, it's because you have your eternal preferences that you will always, no matter what, act according to. That's the way, how, and why your free will is limited, and why we face those things. It's because we do eternally act according to our real ego, which is covered by the false perverted version of it here, okay? And we literally will never choose to act outside of our eternal ego tendencies overall. That is actually the nature of the living entity's so-called limitation, which is actually not a limitation at all, because it's just what you eternally prefer. So it's like this. It's like, here's a very mundane example, but just to give you the idea. Very mundane example, not exactly the correlation, but I think you get the gist of what I'm saying here. So if you have a certain flavor of ice cream, right? Or let's say a better example, there's like a food you really, really like the taste of, okay? And you just love the taste of it. And then there's another food that you've tried to develop a taste for, but it tastes bland and stuff like that. Yes, you can eat it, and you can convince yourself you like the other food more, artificially, mentally. You can tell yourself you like the taste of it better. But at the end of the day, you ultimately like the taste of this other ice cream or whatever the other food is better. See? No matter how much you artificially choose, right, to like the other food more, it's still an artificial imposition, and you don't really actually like that other food more. You're just convincing yourself you do. You actually, physiologically, like the taste of the other sweet more, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, as living entities with eternal preferences, those eternal preferences don't change. So, like if we have an eternal preference for a specific type of pure gratification in Goloka. Now, when I say gratification in Goloka, I'm talking about gratification that involves pure loving service to Radha Krishna, all living beings, and one's eternal self at the same time. Okay? So you have a particular food flavor you like in Goloka. Let's say it's mangoes or something. Mangoes are a good example. Then that inclination of that original version factor of you is going to translate and spill over into how you're temporally conditioned in illusion in so many ways. And that may spill over to you not liking mangoes in the temporal state, but in a different way. There's a whole detailed science of how your consciousness spills over from Goloka into matter, okay? Which I'll delve into much deeper in videos to come. Very specific science to it. So basically, you have to really deeply analyze things like, okay, if you have specific fetishes, this is a big deal nowadays also, and you have to analyze and understand how that's related to your eternal preferences, okay? You cannot ignore or brush aside these things because they won't go away. They won't just disappear. Your fetishes won't disappear. They'll still be there. There'll still be things you have to face and deal with and think about, because what it is, it's Radha and Krishna actually hinting to you, hey, this is the perverted version of something real. So pay attention to what that is, the perverted version of. Look into it further. That's what they're trying to get you to do. And that's why they keep popping up and don't go away. It's not, see, so with our addictions and stuff and our obsessions in this world for good tasting food, for sex, for this stuff, they keep lingering and staying there because Radha and Krishna want us to analyze those things. It's not because they're lingering and staying there just because of some generalized, oh, it's just because we're sinful that way, that therefore they just remain there ambiguously, for whatever reason. They just stay there because we're sin. No, it's because they're wanting you to understand what those are perversions of. That's what they're wanting you to understand. Then you can tap into your real ego from understanding that, and those things will slough off with no problem, in ever increasing degrees of ease and less difficulty, right? So a really good thing for devotees who basically, or actually I would say all devotees actually, but especially those coming in to this understanding, this consciousness, who have really strong attachments to specific types of sex gratification or sense gratification in general, specific foods. A very important exercise in this regards is to find what aspects of that indulgence and gratification inspire you in Krishna consciousness. inspire you in fixating on Krishna's form more, and all these other things. That is actually a very strong indication of your Svarupa, your eternal form, okay, and eternal personality. Now, in the course of realizing to various degrees what the nature of your eternal personality is, okay, this will start off generalized and it will become more and more refined as time goes on. When you realize what your real personality is, the real version, it becomes very easy to naturally give up the perverse versions of stuff. So, if someone originally starting to come in is addicted to a certain type of meat, let's say chicken is the meat they're addicted to, right? And they know they should give this up because it's cruel to animals, it's causing harm, etc. But they just have this physiological obsession with the flavor, okay? That also, even though it is a sinful act, has a connection to who you are really, eternally. That doesn't necessarily mean you are a meat eater eternally, nor does it necessarily mean, and no, meat eating is not a good thing. But what I'm saying is, that will give you an understanding of who you are if you pay close attention. Pay very close attention to the specifics of the flavor, okay? Pay very close attention to the nature of the taste that inspires you. Pay attention to what happens to your brain when you eat those foods, okay? And these will all give you very strong indications as to how to go about your meditations, chanting, etc. And then that will help you very easily be able to give up eating that chicken or whatever the horrific thing it is that you're doing, whether it's a sex act, obsession, fetish, etc., or some type of meat eating, gambling, some form of intoxication. And usually all of these things kind of go together, you know, to various degrees. Usually people who are hooked on sex, they tend to have a somewhat unregulated diet. They tend to eat a little bit of onions and garlic or eggs here and there, stuff like that, you know, even as devotees or something. And vice versa. People who tend to eat a lot of meat, obviously are doing all the other things. Also, people who tend to intoxicate tend to gamble and take unnecessary risks and all these other things. So all the four principles are all connected in terms of, you know, doing one, you tend to be engaged in the others also. So, just understand free will. That's why the free will is so-called limited. It's not limited in the way or for the reason most people think. It's not because you're a living entity that your free will is limited. No, it's because you're a living entity who has eternally unique preferences. That's why your free will is experienced in a limited state. It's literally you preferring not to choose certain things eternally forever, right? So let's say a good example of this is someone's in the temporal state in illusion, identifying with the false ego. Most individuals conditioned in male consciousness, male bodies, want to have huge sex harems of females just for themselves, right? Palaces, and they want to enjoy sex gratification with huge numbers of females, beautiful women. That just tends to be a natural subconscious inclination in those who are conditioned in male bodies, temporally speaking, right? And this is basically, once again, this is a generalized obsession and fixation in the back of the mind, once again, because loving service to Radha and Krishna, pure loving service to them, which is specific, yes, for each individual, but the principle itself or I should say the principles themselves, Radha and Krishna, in terms of talking about all living entities altogether, that is the generalized principle in the sense of, and that's the perversion of the generalized principle, because no matter what rasa you have with Radha and Krishna, you're experiencing sexual pleasure. The perversion of which, in the temporal world, is you experiencing having a harem of thousands of women enjoying sex with them, etc. If you're conditioned in male consciousness. That's the perversion of whatever pure relationship you have with Radha and Krishna, which in most cases doesn't involve sexual intercourse at all. So, or I should say in many cases it doesn't at all with them, in the sense that we understand it now. But that's, once again, that's the generalized perversion. Then there's the more specific perversions for each person, okay, on a more personal level, who have much more specific issues, okay? Whatever those particular issues may be, you know what they are for yourself. You know what your issue is. So, and I know what mine are. And many of you are familiar with what a lot of mine are also. So, because I talk about them. But the point is, you guys can get what I'm saying. You guys can understand what I'm getting at here. It's a so basically, it's really important that together we shift this whole erroneous paradigm of just kind of sidelining and brushing aside the importance of yourself, individual, like as a thing that's taught and preached and discussed as being important. Like, you really do need to focus on your actual self. individually, your real ego. That is actually very important in Krishna consciousness. But it's quite simple, though. It's very simple. You can understand when your real ego is at work, is that when you're doing things and engaging that increase your enthusiasm to make contact with Radha and Krishna, to be involved with them, etc. Then you can understand that that's your real ego at work. Doing things and engaging in acts that are causing you to feel depressed and less inclined or enthusiastic towards making contact with them, okay? I'm talking about Radha and Krishna specifically, contact with them, okay? Anything that's causing you to feel less inclined towards that is something that has to do with the false ego on somewhere along the line, okay? And also, not only to do with the false ego, but unnecessarily ignoring your real egoistic tendencies, okay? So a person can understand this very clearly. The real ego always feels affection towards others, always, okay? The real ego never feels inclination towards vengeance or envy at all. The real ego appreciates others' uniqueness, okay? The real ego also values oneself and one's own infinite uniqueness also, and feels special in a pure way, not in a falsely egoistic superiority type way. So you feel infinitely special, but you don't feel superior or inferior to others. You don't even have the concept of superior or inferior in pure consciousness. You don't even look at it that way, okay? The whole idea of something being superior or inferior is absent in Goloka Vrindavana, because everything is based on pure affection, period. There's no superior, inferior, none of this stuff. It's all affection, okay? So real ego is affection-based. False ego is superiority, inferiority based in thinking, okay? So just throw out all the superior, inferior stuff from your thinking. Just get rid of it, because that's not even a thing. It's not real. There's no such thing as superiority or inferiority. The way that the brain processes it doesn't exist, no. And if things are talked about as being superior or inferior, transcendentally speaking, it's simply dealing with degrees of affection, felt, shown, experienced, etc. Okay? It's not referring to those things the way the temporal brain thinks about them. Now, the temporal brain always thinks about those things in terms of rankings, like a hierarchy, okay? There is no ranking or hierarchy or anything like that between the living entities and Radha and Krishna. No, there are specific functions, okay, that Radha and Krishna have, and that we have, okay? But there's none of this superior, inferior stuff going on. It's pure affection. That's it, period, okay? So there's been many people inclined towards suicide, many people who have come to Krishna consciousness, and a lot of it, you talk to them, and it's directly related to a lot of the really bad preaching, which is well-intentioned, okay? Like really bad preaching and teaching that's well-intentioned, though, you see? In many cases, actually, it's preaching from actual pure devotees, but because they deliver it in a way that the individual cannot correctly process, it also causes harm to them, indirectly at least, right? Because these points we're talking about now aren't clarified to people enough, and this is a problem I've seen, right? So, a good example, Prabhupada himself is a pure devotee of Radha and Krishna. We all know this. He's my eternal friend and everything. Once again, don't think in terms of these rankings, superior, none of this stuff. I'm not looking at the situation from that perspective myself at all. I'm looking at it from each individual is infinitely unique and infinitely important. And that's the Goloka perspective, okay? So Prabhupada being infinitely unique, infinitely important, and we have infinite love and affection for him. I also, when I'm reading Prabhupada's purports, with all of these things in mind about how I feel towards him personally, strongly disagree in many cases with how he relays principles and concepts of the living entities, actual situation. In many cases, people who don't actually have this connection with Prabhupada on an affection-based heart level will severely misunderstand how he words things. Like they'll read, okay, the living entity is insignificant, infinitesimal, and they'll process that in their brains wrongly, that Prabhupada is saying, you factually are not important. Who are you? They'll process it in all these ways that like have to do with him like pointing the finger, them thinking he's pointing the finger saying, you're worthless, you're not important, blah, 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 this and that. That's how they'll be reading when they see the word insignificant. And I'm looking at a lot of Prabhupada's purpose, and I'm like, Prabhupada, I get what you're saying, I get what your meaning is, but probably over 95% of people who read your statements are either going to negatively misunderstand them or pseudo positively understand them, in the sense that they'll basically they'll get wrong ideas about themselves. They'll be like, oh yeah, this is Krishna, but now I just need to ignore my real ego now, basically, which is not what you're supposed to do. Because when most people run into that, then they'll come to all these thoughts on it, and then that'll just kind of linger in the brain, even once they read later on into things, you know. So you'll notice that's why I don't explain things the way Prabhupada explains them. At least the way he words stuff, I don't do that. Because the only ones who really understand what Prabhupada is getting at are the ones who actually feel him out on a personal heart level. Okay? Whereas most people coming in initially won't get him and feel him out on a heart level. They'll just be looking at his words, and that's what they'll be associating with him. And that's a problem. And it doesn't work. They'll get the wrong ideas of Prabhupada and what he's saying. So, so again, when it comes to these things, you have to always be aware of it. You have to be aware that Prabhupada himself and every single pure devotee is eternally a living being who has different preferences from you, okay? And those eternal preferences will come out in the way they relay Krishna consciousness to you. They will, because that's a symptom of their eternal individuality, okay? So no matter what, there will be disagreements on certain things, very strong ones actually, regarding certain specifics about how to explain things, how to go about one's service and relationship with Radha and Krishna. The same general principle is always the same. Radha and Krishna are the center, their forms are the center, pure loving affection for them is the center, and whether you prefer their expansions to engage in devotion is, those are all within the realm of preferences, okay? But the factual center is Radha and Krishna's forms, Lord Chaitanya's form, right? And then us engaged with them and other beings. That's the central, generalized, united factor. Even for those who do the Vishnu Bhakta stuff of the other sampradayas, that's still the central factor, okay? So basically, we really have to start shifting into, like, genuinely valuing each individual's uniqueness. Now this is very important, because I've been going on about this over and over again. I've really been contemplating really hard on this one. How to go about having Radha's message spread correctly and accurately without the cultism stuff following it. In other words, so we can have a real living movement that's genuine, legitimate, that's actually Lord Chaitanya's actual movement, where Harinama Sankirtana is the center of focus, but where each individual is really, like, emphasized in terms of their actual importance, not a sentimental thing, but like as a solid tenet of what we teach and preach here, you know, like a solid tenet, like you're extremely valuable yourself and you need to see yourself that way, and to us, etc. So this is essential, this is key, because this is Sri Radha's perspective, and she wants us to have this perspective also. So here's the thing, Radharani herself also values herself. So it's not that she's fixated on Krishna, fixated on us, and doesn't value herself at the same time. No, she very much values herself and understands her importance and her importance to us, etc. Because once again, the three factors that we need to have, love for Radha and Krishna, love for others, and love for ourselves, all three together, okay? Without leaving out the love for yourself as a key part of this, okay? And not brushing aside that part as less important. That's loving yourself is equally important to loving others and loving Radha and Krishna. Equally important, okay? So if you to any degree think that that's less important on any level whatsoever, then you will immediately notice that you do not feel as enthusiastic or enlivened in your Krishna consciousness. Immediately. It might start subconscious, but it will be there. The reason for that is your real consciousness, you are valuing yourself along with valuing others and valuing Radha and Krishna specifically and especially. So, and I mean really valuing yourself. Like really deeply, not just like as a principle. Okay, I'm important because I'm eternally unique. No. You really have to go into what that actually means. It's like, how are you important? Why are you important? What does that mean? What does your infinite uniqueness mean? How are you important to Radha and Krishna? You have to understand this and focus on this. How are you important to them? Okay? How do you please them personally? What is your eternal preferences in regards to pleasing them? Okay? All of these things are things you need to think about and focus on and appreciate. All of these things together. So, because that's really what it comes down to. You'll see the main reason of people feeling depressed, lonely. Here's the thing. Once again, this impersonalistic stuff that's been creeping around, I always talk about it all the time. You notice how so many people all over the place are feeling ever more lonely, alone. And this is translating to so many devotees, and they're starting to like justify this alone feeling. Or what's really going on, there's actually no such thing as aloneness or loneliness. In fact, the whole idea of loneliness is actually an impersonalistic concept, because we're always with face-to-face other living beings, surrounded by them, whether our eyes are closed and we're not looking at them, or whatever. We're always surrounded by Radha and Krishna themselves directly as well. So an attachment and separation is an experience. It's a pastime experience. You're not actually ever separated from Radha and Krishna. And even when the devotees who experience that so-called separation are experiencing that, they know that they're not actually separate from Radha and Krishna or separate from other living beings. Separate in the sense of being not with them. I'm not talking about oneness amalgamated here. Anybody who's been following this stuff, we oppose impersonalism top to bottom, obsessively, probably more than anybody else does in the world. But when I say there's no loneliness, in the sense that you're always with face-to-face interacting with other beings, no matter where you are. Whether you're supposedly physically, quote-unquote, alone in your room, you're not actually alone. And I'm talking about real time here. Like, there's huge numbers of living entities interacting with you and appreciating you and loving you in Goloka, okay, which is the real world, real time, and also even in the temporal state, because all those little bacterias in your body, those jivatmas surrounded by bacteria consciousnesses, okay, they're actually svarupas. They're actually eternal forms beyond space and time, interacting with you, loving you, and having reciprocations with you in Goloka. That's actually why those living entities were put into your body as cells, because they also have an eternal relationship with you in Goloka. You never run into anybody in this world or interact with them or have a face-to-face contact through the entirety of your conditioning unless they have an eternal relationship with you in Goloka specifically. Period. It doesn't happen, because this is the perversion of the real world. So all the living entities you meet and interact with over the course of all your incarnations and bodies are people you know eternally. All of them. Okay? So that's the bacteria, that's the insects, that's the animals, that's the plants, that's the stuff that's in the air, that's the stuff that's on your carpet. All of those are living beings with svarupas, your eternal friends, who love and care about you, and who you are important to them. Okay? Very deeply important. All right? And this is a fact. This is like a fact, So what to speak of all this externalized, worldly, false fame that has nothing to do with us at all anyway? One way or the other, whether you're famous or infamous or lacking fame altogether, none of those things have anything to do with you at all. Each one of us is eternally famous already, because you're eternally appreciated by everyone around you. And like we were just talking about here, all the little bacterias and stuff floating through your body, all the little molecules, yes, actual subatomic molecules are also living beings with that consciousness as well. There's no such thing as a molecule just being a molecule. No, they're also living beings. Even under the bacteria level of consciousness, there's the geometric shape level of consciousness. Okay, I'm a geometric shape, or I'm an atomic particle movement vibrational frequency. Those are also living beings. Okay, so all these, turn that off for a moment. So all these like new age philosophers talking about all this stuff, where like you have to really absorb in this vibration at this frequency or that frequency. In many cases, those people, they actually take birth as specific vibrational molecules, because they're obsessed with a certain vibrational type thing or vibrational frequency type fixation, right? And along with that, having like impersonalistic leanings and stuff, that obsession with vibrations so much will actually that could very easily lead to you taking a form of a subatomic molecule. Or I should say, being surrounded by a subatomic molecule as how you identify yourself, okay? Once again, because when you're at that level, or you're that small of a level, you're pretty much almost at the level of being beyond space and time. Because there's a certain point where you go so small that you get to Goloka again, that you're once again in transcendence. So like transcendence goes both ways. If you go small enough, you eventually hit Goloka, beyond space and time. And if you go large enough, you eventually hit Goloka too. So within temporal space and time, there's a range of sizes and things like that, especially and specifically on the subatomic level, but also on the universal levels as well. The entirety of the material cosmoses altogether only make up 1/4, and the entirety of anything illusory whatsoever only makes up 1/4 of the transcendent world. And that's not even speaking of Radha and Krishna's direct forms, which are even vaster than the spiritual world, larger in scope actually, and more beyond space and time than even the spiritual world is even. So the point is here, any way you cut it, any way you look at it, you always have association that's real. All right. Now the next argument would come up. Then people would bring up, okay, well, even though theoretically we know they're there, we know we're in Golok, we know we have those eternal forms, what we really want is flesh, face-to-face contact with other physical devotees being present in front of us, who speak and interact and laugh, and all these other types of things. That's what we actually want. Okay, and people we agree with and things like that, because after all, we're still conditioned, and we can't really go that deep like the acharyas do into all this stuff. And these are the arguments that people will convince themselves of. Okay, we have to have this face-to-face contact with people. It's like, yes, of course, but that face-to-face contact, and this is going to start happening much more with this correct type of preaching and teaching and stuff going on, where people are now feeling valued, and not only feeling valued, but knowing they're valued as a central tenet of our practice. Okay, like we have to value them deeply. It's like it's not optional. You can't just, even if somebody you disagree with them on so many levels, you cannot in our sangha or association or family dislike that person on a core level. You have to feel affection for them. You have to. That's what it means to have the perspective of Sri Radha. You have to feel affection for them. So just like she does. So this is going to eliminate all of this, like devotees feeling isolated, lonely, all this other stuff, because with correct teaching, that stuff goes away. Okay, but you can't leave any of this out. You can't leave stuff out, because if you leave things out, people feel left out, right? And that's because the principles are being left out. So therefore, individuals feel left out, right? It's very easy to understand why this is going on, and it's very easy to fix too. So, so in terms of everything we've talked about today, now we understand what the real ego is, if we haven't already. We understand the importance of real ego. And when I say ego, I'm always talking about real ego by default. So we understand now that we're changing the paradigm. So when we all say ego, we're talking about real ego. When you say ego by itself. If somebody's assuming like an idiot, we're talking about false ego, which isn't ego in the first place, then they're an idiot. They're a fool. They're just assuming things. Like they assume all sorts of other stuff about what we talk about. You know, just like people assume we're talking about something about encoded music videos that we're not saying at all, because they don't watch the presentations and they don't interact with us and don't talk to us. They just assume. Same thing with this. So when we start talking about, when we start typing or saying, okay, ego, embrace ego, focus on ego, ego is important, everybody's just going to be assuming that we're talking about false ego. But that's them assuming. That's not what we're talking about. It's their own foolishness. So, so anyway, so we're changing the paradigm, one word at a time, one name at a time, I should say. Because once again, words are very unnecessary, they're temporary, and they only do harm, like Radha and Krishna say. Any word that's not associated as one of their names directly is simply something that's going to cause harm, period. It's that simple. It doesn't matter what the topic is, what the word is, doesn't matter. Unless you're associating that word as being specifically a name of Radha and Krishna and referring to their form, that's a word that's causing harm. Okay? So, so to eliminate causing harm to others, which is why we experience daily misery, anxiety, depression, and stuff, it's because we're not seeing things the way we've just talked about in this video. So if we ignore any of these three factors about Radha and Krishna, others, and ourselves, okay? And usually devotees tend to ignore the third. They tend to ignore and brush aside and sideline and minimize the importance of the third, of me, the big 1-0, okay? So, and because they do that, that is what causes the depression. And you can test this. I mean, you can test all these things I'm talking about. You can test it looking at things from different perspectives like this, seeing it from all these angles, and you'll notice the different angles of vision you see things according to will either cause you some degree of depression or dissatisfaction or uplift you, right? You can see this. You can observe it easily. So no living being likes the feeling of feeling insignificant or unimportant. Why? Because that's not natural. You are important and you are significant. And that's your natural experience. So if for whatever weird reason you're not experiencing you being significant and important, and not feeling important, then that's a problem, because you're obviously absorbing to some falsely egoistic idea of yourself, which is not true. And this is one thing I like about what Dharma Pravartaka Acharya says in one of his lectures. He talks about humility is not humiliation. They're two completely different things. Humility simply means, and this is one thing I'm very glad he presented this way. Now, keep in mind, I don't agree with 100% of everything he says, but I do acknowledge him as a pure devotee, and I appreciate his teachings very deeply. And I'm very happy the way he's preaching on most things, except a few key points that I disagree with at this time of this video. So I'm saying this now at this time because in the future that may change and adjust. We may tend to agree more over time. We'll see. We'll see. But the point is, what he's saying and what others are saying in that regards, I like and appreciate very much so. That this humility is not the same as humiliation. Humility simply means you are focused on who you actually are, so real ego, actual ego, and embracing that factually, with the false ego getting sloughed off, okay, in the process, as a side effect. So the false ego going away is actually a side effect. It's never the direct activity that's focused on. So you'll notice the more you try to focus on giving up your false ego, the more it's just you're going to get filled with more false ego, right? But it's just going to mold and shape into a different type of false ego. So check this out. You'll notice this. So if you try to shift your consciousness into this mindset of, okay, I'm going to get rid of my false ego. I'm just going to focus on giving service to Radha and Krishna and all the living beings, but then you leave out the real ego factor of yourself, you're going to notice that your false ego just warps into a different type of false ego. More in the mode of goodness, yeah, but still warped and distorted and not fully satisfied. And it's because you're missing out on your eternal real ego, valuing importance, fixation on that aspect, okay? And because you're leaving that important factor out, that all-important factor out, you're experiencing the side effect of the false ego simply warping into a different type of false ego. So it's like, okay, you've managed to shift your false ego from one version to another. So, okay, I guess in principle you could say I got rid of false ego, one type of false ego, but you've just changed it into another type of false ego because you haven't absorbed in your real ego yet, you see? So, and that's why the individual still experiences lack of happiness, lack of joy, etc. Because a lot of people I express a lot of emotions, right, in these videos, but internally, like, I feel really, really happy and relaxed. Like, most people wouldn't believe it, me telling them this. They think I'm like uptight or like I'm really bothered by something. Really, I'm not actually bothered by things in the sense that most people think I am or assume I am. Like, internally, I'm feeling extremely calm on a daily basis. And no matter what the external situation that arises that others would perceive as being stressful or difficult or whatever, it's just, it's easy for me. Like, things aren't experienced as being difficult for me in my life. And that also translates to things working smoothly in my life too, also, But it's because I maintain this particular consciousness. So I'm experiencing the result of this consciousness, which is simply my original consciousness. It's not based on me putting an effort into it or anything. It's Radha and Krishna's causeless mercy. But the point is, you just have to tap into their causeless mercy, focus on that, and focus on your real ego, giving love and feeling love and affection towards them, other beings, and yourself. You just have to feel that affection. In fact, you don't even have to physically do activities necessarily to feel that affection. If in your individual case you feel like you have to do a physical activity to incite that sense of affection for them, then you do that. But once again, it's unique for each individual. So a great example of this, a very practical example, and this doesn't have to do with material conditioning necessarily, no. So, like, for example, like in the kitchen, right? In principle, I love helping out. And in practical action, of course, I like helping out in the kitchen, like Radha's kitchen, or in the like temple kitchens when things are being cooked and stuff. I like helping out, knowing that I'm serving Radha and Krishna and being part of that. But the actual act of cooking itself is just never my thing. It's not my eternal preference. Why? And I'll give you a very direct example of this. Because my eternal experience in Goloka is being fed by my eternal mother, being the one taken care of, provided for, and having other people doing the cooking. And that is one thing that very directly translates into my temporal conditioning here on the illusory side. So the point is, like, it's not that, okay, you keep doing cooking Kamadevadas, and by doing it more and more and more and more, you'll just automatically start to like it over time, because it's, at the end of the day, it's devotional service. It doesn't work that way, because it's like, no, my preferences are, I prefer to serve Radha and Krishna in these specific other ways more, right? And so, and that's always my inclination. So even if I am in the kitchen, I'm thinking about serving them in these other ways while I'm doing the kitchen services, you see? So it's like, so what I'm saying is it's artificial. It would be artificial for me to shift my whole focus to, emphasizing cooking in the temple or being in the kitchen, making deity preparations and stuff as the entirety of my focus, because that's not my preference, right? So your preferences are meaningful things. They're important to look at too. It's not just, and in many cases for Krishna devotees, because all the Krishna devotees I've talked to are very sincere, genuine people, very kind and loving on so many levels. So saying that a person like that, is specifically like falsely egoistic, they're focused on their sense gratification, they're lazy because they don't like to cook. There's plenty of people that love to cook, and they don't have to have any push or urge or anything. And that's because that's naturally their preference, right? On the temporal and transcendentally. So the point is, like, there's no lack of people who like to cook. That's not going to be a problem. There's plenty of people who enjoy cooking as a service and in so many other ways, both temporally and in Goloka. And there's plenty of other people that love to do other stuff too. So a lot of times people get in this weird mindset of like, oh, if we stop enforcing things, nobody will do certain things. It's like, no, that's not how it works. The whole principle of Varnashrama is there's always somebody inclined to do something to fill in the gaps by Radha and Krishna's direct arrangement. So it's like people have to have more certainty and confidence in how this works with this perspective. Like Radha and Krishna arrange specifically that the individuals that take birth among us are inclined towards certain things so that they fill those certain functions. It's not just material conditioning. Like people get this wrong idea of Varnashrama that it's just, oh, one person's inclined to plow fields, one person's inclined to do art, music, and all this stuff because that's how they're conditioned. No, it actually has more to do with that's how Radha and Krishna have arranged their psychophysical construction to fill those functions in the temporal world while they internally meditate on their relationship with Radha and Krishna internally. That's actually the more of the reason why. Much more so than their individual conditioning. So yeah, Varnashrama Dharma is not just about people being conditioned and that's why they have certain tendencies. No, it's because that's Radha and Krishna's arrangement. So that somebody grows the food, somebody does the music, somebody does the art, somebody does the leadership, so that people get stuff done, right? Because Radha and Krishna, they're not going to set up a society. They're not going to arrange people's psychophysical constructions in a way that everybody's just sitting down meditating all day and nobody does anything else. And if they were to arrange that, they would also simultaneously arrange that milk and fruits and everything else was just automatically piled in front of those individuals so that they're fed and that they just go right back to meditating again. They would arrange that that is taken care of, if that was their intention for everybody to be doing that, right? They would arrange that fruit trees were all over the place and they grew within like minutes. They would also arrange that cows would just gush out milk everywhere into bowls of their own accord. And that's how things would be. That's how it is in many of the heavenly planets, actually, where people can sit all day and meditate if they choose to do so. But because most people, in the heavenly planets and the lower planets focus more on gratifying their senses, they don't do it that way, usually. So these principles can be understood very easily. Let's see. Hare Krishna. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit more about that, Ishvaranandani. Good points here. And then Robin Cloud. Hare Krishna, Robin Cloud. Edwin Chandra, welcome. Welcome, Kankari Das. Hare Krishna. Is personal attacks allowed by devotees giving lecture on Vyasa-san? Or what they say, critical observation or correction? Not important, I lost bird. I'm sorry. Welcome, Presley. A lot of you guys joined earlier. I wasn't able to... You're going to be just fine, Ishvara. Not just fine, you're going to be great, okay? So you are happy and you will be happy. So we're going to video chat very soon here, Ishvari, so that we can get this all sorted out with your situation. But all of the stuff I'm talking about is related to these things directly and why devotees are experiencing these depressions and stuff. So Edwin Chandra's question, the point he brought up, is a very good point, actually. Because here's the thing. It has to do with the intent within the consciousness that makes something sinful or not. So here's an example of this. You could have a situation where there's millions of people sitting down in front of a lecture, in front of an actual, factual, pure devotee. Okay? And then you have one person standing there that starts shouting and yelling at the top of their lungs directly at the pure devotee. Okay? It doesn't. But most people around, seeing the situation, would associate that external behavior with that individual feeling ill intent towards the pure devotee on some level or another. But what may actually very well be happening is that him and that pure devotee are actually engaging in something completely different that no one is seeing externally in Goloka, and they're having a great time, loving interactions. Manifested externally on the perverse plane as him supposedly shouting or yelling at the person. So those millions of people would assume that that person shouting and yelling, they would just assume based on the visuals of it, unless they were tapped into what's going on deeper. This is why internal vision is so important, because you can feel out what's actually going on between people beyond the externals, okay? And you can also feel what your eternal inclinations are in those situations. But so you'd have millions of people thinking that this person's like some really offensive individual, some evil guy. Oh, you're just like Shishupal because you're shouting at a pure devotee. Where it's like, well, that's their assumption though, okay? And so, they'd probably take up swords or, axes or guns or whatever. It was that situation, or police would come in and try to arrest the guy or whatever. But the point is, that individual shouting may actually be giving pleasure to that pure devotee. Very much so, on an internal level, and vice versa. The person may be shouting actually to test people's internal vision towards the external situations. So, but that's the part that most people don't think about. And then they'll go into just this auto mechanic mode. Oh, he's shouting at a pure devotee, therefore no matter what he's saying it's offensive, therefore we're going to attack him and be aggressive. And they just completely brush aside what might be going on internally with the person. Right? And even in the midst of mechanically dealing with somebody like that who's shouting at a pure devotee, then stopping him, hindering him, or whatever, still, even if that's what you're physically doing, you have to have the internal vision that this very well may be a pure devotee also interacting like this. Now, I'm saying this as an example because these types of things are going to be happening in this world stage at large when Sri Radha's message starts becoming widespread. So when I'm sitting talking to people, there's going to be people doing that with me. When other people are sitting talking, there may be me who needs to stand up and disagree with them, or there may be other people doing that, okay, with those other people. So this type of dynamic is going to be happening, right? It's not just going to be all peaceful, lovey-dovey, fun and games where everybody's all on the same page in terms of agreeing on all the specifics on how to serve Radha and Krishna. And those disagreements on how to serve them and love them may actually spill over into matter and the conditioning also, and still be within the realm of pure devotional service, still, at the end of the day. So this is a very extreme example, but it's an example we'll see. And we have seen a lot, actually. Because when I say I see people as pure devotees, especially those engaged in Krishna consciousness preaching, who the majority of what they teach is in line and true and all that, and their attitude is very positive and uplifting, those individuals I recognize for who they are. But when I say that to most people, they're thinking I'm just theoretically looking at it that way. Oh, you're just saying that theoretically. You're looking at them artificially according to pure devotees, but because you disagree with them on some level, that automatically means you feel some inimicalness towards them or some envy or some things like this. It's like, no, that has nothing to do with it. It's just like I want them to preach correctly so that people aren't misled. I want them to preach in the way that actually uplifts Vrindavana devotees, and because they're my family members, and I want them to preach in a way that enlivens and excites. Because oftentimes you'll notice Dvaraka-inclined devotees are excited and enlivened and enthused, while at the same time Vrindavana devotees are completely depressed by one person saying the same things. So you could literally have an assembly of devotees, some inclined towards the Vrindavana mood, others towards the Dvaraka mood, where one batch is depressed and really bothered by what somebody's saying, and the other side's completely loving it, right? Once again, a symptom of eternal preference and eternal personality. So this shouting and these arguments and these intense interactions between devotees, very sincere devotees, and especially between pure devotees, whoever they are and wherever they are among us, this is why this correct teaching and correct perspective is so important, because no single devotee anywhere feels pleasure showing aggression or anger towards another devotee, even if they do so. We always feel regret about it. All devotees do, immediately, and we have a conscience about it. We feel empathy. So this is the default. This is the default for all Krishna devotees, period. We do feel empathy. We don't like and we don't find pleasure in being aggressive or shouting at others. And if we are finding pleasure and liking in those, that's not devotional service to Krishna at all. That is within the demonic, asuric realm of consciousness. Okay? Where understanding and information about Radha and Krishna is more or less theoretical in that level. If somebody actually finds pleasure in harming others, that Krishna is very clear, that is devotional service in the mode of ignorance, tamas, which is not actually devotional service. The actual devotional service is always Shuddha Sattva. Mixed devotional service is mixed with those three modes, and it's actually not actually devotional service. It's basically just an alloyed thing, right? So what to speak of devotees not doing that? My God, if somebody's trying to pass as a Krishna devotee and actually finding pleasure in being aggressive towards someone or hurtful towards them, and when I say being aggressive, I mean like with the intent of harming, and finding pleasure in someone being harmed, no, that doesn't work. Like, that's not a Krishna devotee at all. If they find pleasure in someone being harmed on any level, even if it's a revenge thing, that's still not devotional in consciousness on any level. So I'll give a great example of this. Even in the case of Bhima Deva, him physically ripping out the heart of Dushasana, drinking his blood and everything else, even in that situation, where his vengeance was actually fully justified and actually the karmic result that Dushasana had to face for disrobing his wife, even though all his actions were actually proper in that case, within his heart during that process, who are we to say what his consciousness actually was? Was his consciousness actually vengeful towards Dushasana, or was internally he meditating on his loving relationship with Krishna and just externally engaged in that mode of passion for the purpose of serving Krishna in love and affection? Or was he actually contemplating vengeance towards Dushasana? See? Who are we to know? You see, in either case, the point is, even if Bhima himself was feeling actual vengeance or hate towards Dushasana on a temporally conditioned level, identifying him as Dushasana, that body, as an evil, asuric enemy king or whatever, even if Bhima's consciousness was like that for a time, he would still be self-checking. He would still recognize it within himself that, you know what, and he would feel it sensationally, that I really don't actually feel anger towards this person. I shouldn't feel this way towards him. And then basically he would still express that anger and fury. So visually, everybody externally would think he's still envious and jealous and angry or whatever. But really, Bhima was just getting the job done, right? So, but the point is that's within Bhima's own consciousness. Who are we to say if he was influenced by actual vengeance or not? That's not for us to say, because that's his own psychophysical construction that only he experienced, and that's between him and Krishna. So each individual's psychophysical ins and outs, like how they're actually feeling about something or going about something, if they're an actual Krishna devotee at all, on any level, they will experience empathy and they will feel bad if they find any degree of pleasure in being aggressive with others. And when I say this, I'm talking about feeling aggression towards others, okay? Which I've never found pleasure in feeling aggression towards others at all, on a bodily, mental, or conceptual level at all. So physical shouting and roaring and yelling and running around and stuff, swinging your arms around, that's not necessarily aggression either, unless the intent and the result is that you're actually harming devotees and you're actually physically harming people and mentally harming people and finding pleasure in it. That's when it's aggression. So, and so the point is, the devotees who have the right consciousness and are taught correctly, they won't do those things either anyway. You won't go around hurting people. It's just not in your nature. You just won't do it because of everything we've talked about, right? So really, devotees really need to develop and teaching these things to the people we interact with too, about what we actually teach and believe and adhere to and stuff. So right now I'm actually working on a list of very specific tenets that we all do agree on within the International Harinama Sankirtana movement, in such a way that we ensure all of these very important factors, and that also we ensure the elimination of the potential at any point in the history of our movement which is Chaitanya's movement, actually. So the International Harinama Sankirtana movement is not some separate branch off other movement. No, it's simply Chaitanya's movement that we are making sure remains and continues streaming in a guaranteed fashion, where people feel properly valued as a standard tenet. So we'll basically be able to eliminate this cultism. The main way in which we'll be able to eliminate this is that it won't actually even be allowed for people to behave in a way where they make themselves out to be superior or inferior to someone else. And also, we're going to do it in such a way that the impersonalistic philosophies and ideologies are exposed fully for what they actually are. And they're not dealt with as philosophies, they're dealt with as erroneous things all completely. Okay, which is what they are. So philosophy, and it has to do with the specifics within the appreciation of the forms, the affection of Radha and Krishna and us. That's what reality has to do with. That's what actual philosophy has to do with. Okay? Impersonal stuff isn't philosophical at all. It isn't. It's simply illusory. And so this is going to be a very central tenet of the International Harinama Sankirtana movement. So anything that has to do with personal anything towards devotion to Radha and Krishna, that where the personal focus is the emphasis, yes, we'll call out the impersonal tinges and traces to gradually pluck them out. But that's going to be basically the common ground factor. Now, if somebody wants to say, okay, that's cultism because you're basically only allowing specifically personal views to be come in and discussed and dealt with and things like that amongst us, then they can simply assume and think that, but they'll experience coming into us that that's not the case. It's like, yeah, you have the free will to have those views, but we also have the free will to strongly disagree with those views and to speak against them. And that's what I will do. It's not that people who have impersonalistic ideas, will be like banned from coming into our communities or talking to us. No, it'll just be like those ideas, if they express them, we'll shout at them. We'll be like, that's complete BS. That's false. We know better than that, and we can even sit down and discuss you and crush those ideologies right here, right now, if you want to do that. Otherwise, don't waste your time. It's like, basically, we're just telling people don't waste our time, and we're not going to waste your time. Because if somebody's inclined towards impersonalism, they're not going to be inclined towards actual personalism anyway. They might be inclined towards some tinged impersonal mixed with personal ideas or something. But there's an infinity of other groups of people doing that in the world. There's plenty of sampradayas doing that have been, led astray in those ideas. Plenty of them that are talking about that stuff, that have the Radha and Krishna are both personal and impersonal BS and that type of thing, where people are misunderstanding what the acharyas say and stuff. So, there's an infinity of sanghas teaching that garbage that they can hang out with. They don't have to hang out with us. So the point is, basically cultism though is where you artificially impose things. We're like, okay, because somebody they actually can't be here or come here or something. No, it's not going to be like that. It's like if somebody had impersonal views and then they started expressing them on the seat or whatever, or the lecture, we just have a whole horde of people like, no, that's bullshit, that's bullshit. We'd have a whole list of things pointing out everything they're saying and why it's bullshit, basically. Because they'd be like, no, it's actually about the value of the individual. We're infinitely unique, we're distinct, etc. The importance is face-to-face interactions, pure affection, Radha and Krishna's forms. So everybody in the entire assembly be able to pluck out the impersonalism like that. Like, boom. Like, instantly. So it's like people in that situation wouldn't be able to preach impersonalism because everybody in the assembly would know better than what they're talking about. And this is my goal. I want to empower the devotees to know all these things so you all individually can pluck out all the aspects of tinged impersonalism everywhere. And you can know every bit of them. You can know what it is when you see it, okay? And know how to defeat it, actually. So this is why the knowledge is so empowering. Information about the facts of these things is so empowering, because it empowers us to work together as a family, as a community, and it empowers each individual to remain an empowered individual, okay, with a support system. Whereas in cults, you have a hierarchical system where somebody's at the top, what they say goes, and basically people can't express their own views and opinions. That's how a cult works, basically. And then people are ostracized and this and that. Now, this is very important here. We actually emphasize very strongly in our group the importance of having your own views and strongly expressing them. So each altercation, like rah, like shout, like interaction like that, is an individual case-by-case basis between individuals, and that's how we're treating it. And we're going to value those things, actually. So it's like, okay, if somebody disagrees with me also, that's fine. And they can do that, and I'm going to shout back and disagree with them. These things will happen. But those things will happen less and less, and they'll be much more rare as time goes on, once everybody starts realizing the common sense stuff that we're all talking about here, how common sense all of this is. Like, it's very common sense to value people and for them to feel valued as an important standard. like of things we actually have to do and teach both. That's common sense, right? So pretty much most of what we're talking about is common sense. It's just common sense in Kali Yuga has really very much been thrown out the window in every way fathomable, practically speaking. And, you know, when you're dealing with common sense, keeping things real, you notice things are much more calm. You know, you feel calm about stuff. But, yeah. So, you know, and people will have their own individual gurus and stuff like that. They'll keep doing that. They'll keep getting initiated by other people. And that's fine. They can do all that they want. But it's like within the International Harinama Sankirtana movement, we are free completely from people feeling a need to do that or feeling pressured to do so, because that's completely between them and whoever they choose to get initiated by. Or if they don't choose to do it, that's totally fine. It's just, that's a personal thing. And that's actually a core standard of what we teach here, is all of those specifics and stuff and what people believe, that's their personal thing. That's what they personally choose about it, you know? So there will never be anything within our teachings or anything like this coming in that's saying, okay, you know, you have to accept this person, this and that. It's going to be all based on what the person is teaching about Radha and Krishna. That's it, period. It's just going to be an analysis of what they're teaching. It's not going to be anything to do with a personal attack on that person individually, because why? Because they're an eternal, pure, loving associate of Radha and Krishna. That's who they actually are. And if they're preaching some bullshit, they're just preaching bullshit. It doesn't mean that they themselves are bad or impure or something. It's like, nope, you're preaching BS, so just preach correctly. Otherwise, we don't want to hear that teaching, you know, among us. It's like, we love teaching if anybody's teaching, for crying out loud. And see, I'm going to do a whole nother video on this topic, actually. I'm kind of drifting into it now, but it's all connected to what we're talking about today, basically. This is basically the clash and the dynamic I've run into so many times, where I would be very happy, very, very, very happy, if someone was physically present, like Ayendra Prabhu was, but he simply chose not to take formal disciples, and that's totally fine. And I have no issue with that whatsoever, because the principle remains the same. You get back to Goloka by pure affection towards Radha Krishna, other beings, and towards yourself, altogether. And by daily engagement in Harinama Sankirtana. That's how you get back to Goloka. Now, some people may get physical gurus to interact with, others may not. You know, that's, once again, that's part of the case-by-case basis thing. So the point is, what I've run into is I have simply not encountered anyone, because the correct teachings about Radha's form, Radha and Krishna's forms, and the truth about Goloka Vrindavana is so important to me that I simply cannot be silent, and I cannot listen and agree with someone who's not teaching correctly about this, the way that Bhaktisiddhanta taught, the way that Prabhupada taught, and the way Ayendra Prabhu taught, in terms of the message that they taught, okay? And yes, they all three taught correctly about this, but people misinterpret what they say a lot, and that's the problem. Specifically, more people tend to misinterpret more what Prabhupada said than they do what Ayendra Prabhu said and Bhaktisiddhanta said. So Ayendra Prabhu was very clear-cut about Sri Radha, Krishna, Goloka Vrindavana, etc. Very clear-cut all the time about it. So this is what I like about how Ayendra Prabhu taught. Prabhupada taught correctly about this stuff, yes, but he taught in such a way that it left a lot of room. And I'm not saying this is any fault of his that he did something wrong. I'm just saying that's how he presented. That's how his eternal personality is. So he presented in such a way, though, that it left room open for people to interpret his stuff with slight amounts of impersonal interpretations mixed in with the impersonal interpretations. Bhaktisiddhanta preached in a way that was actually less potential than Prabhupada, but he still preached in such a way that, once again, there's no fault on Bhaktisiddhanta, it's just his personality. He still preached in such a way and wrote in such a way, Bhaktisiddhanta, in ways that people misunderstood and felt like downtrodden and abused because they misinterpreted his words. Like they felt less inclined toward meditate on Radha and Krishna based on misinterpreting what Bhaktisiddhanta said. Okay? So the point I'm getting at is, when someone's teaching correctly, no matter how they word it or describe it or go about it, there's very specific wordings and explanations that are still within the realm of pure devotional service. And then there's wordings and explanations that are not, that are basically impersonally tinged and mixed with erroneous ideas. Okay? And so when I see those things, and I've run into this every single case after Ayendra Prabhu, I've run into this, because I analyze what people teach very specifically. I really pay attention to what it is they're preaching across the board, okay? And I look at all the different lectures and stuff like that, and to see what it is they're saying. Now there's many people that are much more highly qualified than me in terms of celibacy, in terms of being qualified for the position of Acharya. Yes, there are many people more qualified than that for myself that are not currently functioning as Acharyas, who could actually, and many pure devotees also. But the point is, even if they're more qualified in that regards, does not necessarily mean that what they're teaching is 100% correct and in line with what Radha and Krishna actually teach about themselves and what the pure devotees who are in this line up to Ayana Prabhu actually teach about Radha and Krishna. No, it doesn't mean that. They may be teaching something erroneous and off and still be pure devotees. Yes. So, but even in those cases, those people still have to be called out regarding those incorrect teachings and made to answer for those specific points that they're teaching, made to answer fully for them. And if they can't give solid answers that explain how that teaching is actually in line with the actual correct fact, if they keep teaching something that's still erroneous at the end of the day, some erroneous conclusion, they have to repeatedly be called out. So I keep running into this. Basically, people would recommend to me people that I saw personally as pure devotees. I'm like, yes, this person is a pure devotee. Like, I like this person individually. I love the way they preach in general. I like pretty much a lot of the stuff about them. There's been many individuals I felt this way about very intensely. Dharma Pravartika Acharya is one of them, actually, in fact. I've been looking at his stuff quite a bit the last couple weeks, and I like a lot of what I'm seeing. Certain other bits of what I'm seeing I don't like a lot, though. And those are very particular things I don't like, and I will, and it's the same things I don't like wherever I run into them. So it's not just him. It's like wherever I see those things, I don't like them, basically. So, so the point is, yeah, I would run into these people preaching and teaching, right? And then I'd notice, like, okay, everything about you I like. I know you're a pure devotee, and I feel affection towards you, and this really sucks, because now you're saying something that's impersonalistically tinged, and I have to call it out, and I really hate having to do this. And this sucks really bad, because now I can't get formally initiated by you because I don't feel comfortable doing so, getting formally initiated by somebody who may not change the way they preach on this inaccurate point, you see? So it's like, I'm not wanting to get initiated by somebody that's not teaching correctly. You know what I'm saying? I can't do that. It's like, it'd be like basically somebody's like doing mechanics, right? They may be an expert mechanic, they may be really good at what they do, but if they're doing like one little part off, right? Like if in the way they fix stuff, they always leave one little bolt a little loose or something, and it's just what they always do, then it's like, yeah, I can't like take an apprenticeship by this guy because there's one part of the process he keeps doing in a way that I will never do it that way. And this is a big problem because it's like, I have to mention to him, hey, so it's like basically it like forces me to be in a position of correcting an actual pure devotee or guru. I hate having to do that. It sucks. And the reason that sucks is because it opens up this whole can of worms, this whole world of people perceiving it as an offense, anything I say. Because what happens is people get sentimentally hooked on the individual themselves, and they tend to like put what they teach to the side as like a side thing, right? The fact of the matter is both of those are equally important, actually. Who they are individually and what they teach. But what's more important in terms of the teaching side of the equation is what they're teaching, more so than who they are individually, okay? That's actually the more important part when it comes to the teaching side of things, okay? When it comes to them in general, just who they are individually, that's a different equation. When it's outside of the lecture circuits, when it's outside of the teaching, okay? Because when you're within the realm of teaching, now you're within the realm of everything you're saying being analyzed. Is it correct? Is it accurate? Etc. And people have the right to analyze what you're saying, right? And cross-reference it with previous acharyas and things. And people should do this and have the right to do so, okay? When you're functioning as a teacher. So, so cults form because people base it on the personality more so than what they're teaching. That's the problem, okay? You have to base it on what they're teaching. Now, here's the thing. The teachings could be completely erroneous and completely inaccurate. But if the ideology is based on what the person is teaching and not on them as a personality cult thing, then you actually have the elimination of the vast majority of what we associate with culty factors, basically. Then you basically have a legit belief system that may be wrong or erroneous, but it's now like an actual religion or religious belief or process or whatever, where the individual person isn't glorified as some like divine being or this or that, but it's what they teach. Once again, every being is divine already by default. So it's never a question of looking at someone as lacking divinity. No. We look at everyone as divine, but then you see, and then someone preaching their glories is that much more divine, okay? But the point is, I've run into that so many damn times that I've just gotten so fed up. I'm like, why can't anybody just preach correctly about Radha and Krishna's glories? about their forms, about the specifics about what impersonalism actually is, how it's not the same as, how it's not co-equal and not okay with the personal teachings. It's like, Ayendra Prabhu clarified all these things. He did it right. He preached correctly. And he understood Prabhupada's books very, very similarly to the way I understood them, which is actually the way Prabhupada intended to understand them. What was the result? Ayendra Prabhu led Harinama Sankirtana. He did all of the things that Lord Chaitanya said are the result of pure devotional service. And he preached correctly about Sri Radha in the entire process. Beautiful. I was like, if somebody could just preach and teach correctly, according to their individual preferences, yes, but correctly according to the actual factual situation of things, I would be so happy in the world to take formal initiation from that person, but only after I mastered, first and foremost, no illicit sex, and of course, no intoxication, no gaming either. So for me, when I read gambling, I read no gaming. Okay, so if I'm gaming, I'm classifying that as gambling. So I'm like, nope, I'd have to be fully in the Brahminical principles specifically before I took initiation in those Brahminical fold of activities. Or formal initiation, period. Anything formal like that, I'd want to, on my own end, make sure I'm fully solid in following the four regulative principles. And even if I was to continue functioning as a kshatriya, I'd need that specified in the initiation specifics. Okay, you're still allowed to hunt and practice this and require to because you're teaching kshatriyas. You're still allowed to do this in a regulated manner. Still allowed. If that was within the specifics, but I'm like, no, because I'm in this sampradaya, I'm in Lord Chaitanya's movement. Even if I were to continue functioning as a kshatriya, I would still consider those things to be sinful and not okay, even though I made my vows. But it's like, well, if I'm going to be forced to have to break those vows anyway, then I may as well not make the vows, That's how I've looked at it, That's my personal choice. So, it's just, because I'm all about not being a hypocrite. I don't like the idea of doing something and then as an intention. That's wrong. That's really wrong, to get formally initiated as an intention to do things right. That's bad. No. That's such a sacred process to me that I'm not going to abuse it in even the slightest way imaginable. So yeah, if there's any person that actually does preach correctly or teach correctly all across the board, please let me know. That'd be great. I mean, I'd love to talk to them. I really would. They can be an ally actually in our movement, and actually it would be a huge ally, and they'd be vouching for everything we're talking about here. So in the meantime, I'll keep teaching and preaching the way I do, no matter what, until somebody who's actually is a pure devotee fully in practice and in teaching comes in and fills the seat, right? And many others. The whole idea is to have many people in that function, not just. And so those people will arise among us for sure. But they're going to arise among us in such a way that anybody who goes about initiation with them or whatever amongst our sangha or sampradaya, that's just going to be their unique thing. It's not going to be a standard or a set thing within our association whatsoever. No, it's just going to be a case-by-case personal choice thing. So we're never going to like specifically promote people in the manner of, okay, this person, you should get initiated by this person because of A, B, and C. No, we're just going to not do it. We're going to leave that for the person to choose. It's like, yes, okay, this person is qualified as a pure devotee. We recognize this, etc. But as far as like saying, therefore you should get initiated by him because of this, no, we're not going to do that part. That's their choice if they want to do that. And if they want to choose to just associate with the person, hang out with them, have a great time, and never get initiated by them, that's their choice too. And so what's been going on is this whole guilt trip thing about people feeling guilt tripped about associating with a pure devotee for a long time and just never wanting to get initiated by him and never agreeing to get initiated, still, maintaining some disagreements with them. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Like that's exactly how you maintain a society without cultism and personality cultism, which always has the potential to mislead people. So here's the thing. And I've been going on and on, but I needed to cover this, The point is this, and I haven't been reading the comments that have been recently popped up, so that's why I haven't answered them. But anyway, let's see here. Edwin Chandra. Yeah, so here's the thing. Prabhupada and Sarasvati Goswami had a really big thing having to remove that. Well, I'll get to that in a second. But so basically the point with all this is that it's like let's say, okay, I'm just going to give a very good example of this, and we've seen the example of this. Let's say, hypothetically, and we have a good reference with the situation with Prabhupada and both Ayendra Prabhu, also Bhaktisiddhanta. We can see this with all the previous acharyas, but this is what I'm saying. The problem with that, the way things have been going, and I'm saying that the issue with the way things have been going for thousands of years also, it's been a problem, it's been an issue, it hasn't been working effectively, and it's been causing a lot of these problems, is when things are gone about in the dynamic they've been going in, it leaves the potential, this is the key word here, it leaves the potential open for corruption to come in as soon as the pure devotee is gone. Okay? That is the source of the cultism, the fanaticism, the madness, all this other stuff. That is the reason. It's because of that. It's because even if someone is a pure devotee, even if everything is in place, they're fully able to deliver disciples, they do everything right, they're complete angels in every way imaginable, right? And that's the ideal situation. Everybody's so happy, everything's wonderful. As soon as they disappear, then you have an entire can of worms potential available for things to collapse, for the philosophy to change, for everything to get thrown all up in the air. And that's exactly what happens every time the devotees disappear. There's a way to eliminate that, though. It's to maintain a solid set of specific teachings that are accurate according to what the acharyas taught, the pure devotees taught, okay? With Sri Radha's form at the center, nobody debates that. Nobody within the entire world of devotional service debates that Radha and Krishna's forms are the central focus at the center of attention, as the main focus. Nobody debates that. So that tenet being the main central focus right there, boom, okay? And then the expansions of them being appreciated relating to that understanding. And then from there, a specific tenet actually, which is based on the importance of each individual's direct connection with Radha and Krishna as a solid standard central tenet, okay? This has to be a standard tenet that is emphasized and talked about in order to eliminate that potential of when the pure devotee disappears, of everything going to hell, everything going to heck. Because even the people who aren't pure will still have that standard set of teachings to adhere to that are accurate and that are correct. Without fanaticism, with valuing each individual purely as important, okay? And with the potential now on the other end, now the potential is for any of those people to fill in the role, to actually become the next pure devotee, to become the next preacher. But without this issue of this vacuum gap as soon as the pure devotee disappears. That doesn't have to be there. There doesn't have to be this vacuum risk every time the pure devotee is gone physically. But the way things have been running and the way things have been set up is the way people have been teaching it, going about their devotional service and initiation, all this stuff, and all the sampradayas practically. It's set up in such a way where there's this default vacuum as soon as the pure devotee is gone. It was never designed to be that way. It's either socially or otherwise. I mean, Krishna designed society to be able to function for huge amounts of time without people functioning in those roles as pure devotees like that. Basically, he's designed it to where they come back in after a while, after there's the devotee disappearing. Not to where there's like this vacuum once they disappear or gone or something. There's no reason that ever needs to happen. Like, it's stupid. You know, let's say, for example, I'm not saying I'm a pure devotee, but the point is, what we're talking about, what we're discussing, if I was to die today or tomorrow, right? Who would continue on the solid standard things? All you guys would. You guys would continue on with these standard tenets and things. But the point is important that we have a standard specific list of these tenets, is so that it is specifically a list that's permanent and that remains permanent, and that we remain in agreement on eternally, like the standard tenets, okay? All the other specific individual things are within the realm of that. But having this list of specific tenets for the International Harinama Sankirtan movement is going to really boost us and help us a lot. It's going to allow pure devotees to arise among us and be welcomed without the cult factor where people feel pressured to be initiated by them or whatever, and where people feel free, this is very key here, where people feel free, open, and welcome to disagree with those individuals, knowing full well that if they do so, that individual also has the right to shout at them and not agree with them and things like this, okay? Openly and in public. The rights go both ways. So there's a right for the individual to disagree with somebody who's preaching, who may be a pure devotee, yes, they have that right, and there's also the right of the pure devotee who is preaching to disagree with what the person's saying, who's disagreeing with them. The rights go both ways, okay? So the point is this. All of those dynamics that will be playing out, though, will be happening within people agreeing on these central tenets. And if it's somebody coming in who isn't agreeing on the central tenets, then they'll be constantly recognized for what it is, right? And so they can either like choose to agree or keep choosing not to agree, and they will just eventually physically leave because they don't agree, right? So we're not going to deal. We're not going to do this pussyfoot around of agreeing to disagree and all this stuff. No, it's like if we disagree, we disagree, and if that point of disagreement comes up again, we're going to keep disagreeing until we either agree or we just leave each other and stop talking, right? So, or we're just going to not talk about those specific points and remain silent about them, knowing full well that we aren't going to agree on them if they're brought up, right? And just focus on the points of agreement. So, so Edwin Chandra, you mentioned, I think Prabhupada and Srila Saraswati Goswami had the burden of removing the Mayavadi into personal aspects from our society, so they could not touch on the topic of Radha and Krishna. If one hears Prabhupada lecture, he is always speaking heavily against impersonalism. Yes. So part of it was that, like they really had to just crush impersonalism as like the main focus, because if they didn't, then we wouldn't be where we are today with being able to preach these things with backup of pure devotees. See, it's basically, we'd be preaching and teaching the same stuff, more or less, about the goddess and God, Radha and Krishna, the significance of their forms and things, but it wouldn't be like, but we wouldn't have the backup unless Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta gave us the backup. You see what I'm saying? So we're eternally, infinitely grateful for them for that, basically. We'd just be teaching what's true, but not having a chain of disciples backing us up in what we're saying. That'd be the only difference. Which people base things way too much on an erroneous understanding of what the disciplic chain is. That's why I always bring it back to that in coding. They must never find them, they must never find us. The golden chains, they must never find them. And that's the whole point. Like, you cannot allow impersonally tinged people to find the actual sampradayas or the actual people teaching correctly, because they will go out of their way to try and kill them and harass them, either philosophically or physically, or both. And I'm saying the impersonalist tinged people will go out of their way to harass the actual personalist devotees. Yes. Let's see here. No Siddhanta means no preaching lesson. Having to adjust every time a teacher is gone. Well, here's the thing, man. Like, with all of those are like cause and effect things, once again. Like, those things you're talking about, like, yeah, the 64 limbs of sadhana bhakti, of course. But seriously, man, like, keep it real, my friends, please. Like, all throughout the day, every single devotee I know on the planet is breaking one of those 64 limbs of sadhana bhakti, like, nonstop. Even if they're making a point to follow the limbs of sadhana bhakti. It's practically literally impossible to follow all the limbs of sadhana bhakti accurately to a T without making some mistake along the line. I mean, it's like, it's really a petty, minuscule thing. It's not that big of a deal, comparatively speaking, to how the individual is actually feeling about others and their affection towards them. It's about how the individual is feeling towards others that causes and inspires them to follow those 64 limbs to that much greater of a degree. But it's like, you gotta let people just have wiggle room and breathe. You know what I mean? Like, if somebody makes mistakes right and left, even here and there or whatever, because we're not basing it on that. We're basing it on their affection, their feeling, and maintaining the correct teachings. That's all. Which is Siddhanta. That's what we always talk about here, is Siddhanta. So the Siddhanta, the perfection of the teachings, basically perfected teachings. Bhakti Siddhanta, the one we actually respect and follow. The very name. So, so yeah, I always kind of carrying these on for so long, but I always get like so absorbed. Like today especially, I'm feeling really inspired to just keep going and not shut the video off. But I really should discipline myself to do half-hour segments of each point, so that way people don't have to watch an entire 2 hours or something to see all of it. You know, just half hour for like, okay, the real ego, what that is thing, free will, how that works, you know, all these little points. Probably do that later, you know, just blocks, and then with like, you know, like a diagram behind me or something, like on a big whiteboard or whatever. That's what I'll start doing. Okay, let's see. Potentially we can accept positive teaching in this aim, but negative ones not attaching to the aimed goal, then this is rejectable. Accept doesn't mean follow, isn't it? Right. Yeah, accept doesn't mean follow necessarily. Exactly. Like, you accept a teaching doesn't mean you necessarily follow the person who's teaching that, and vice versa. If you follow somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean you accept everything they teach either. Like, you just have to have common sense here, like sanity, you know? Please. Please, people, have sanity. Now, here's the thing. What devotees need to understand is this: the temporal the temporal situation now, in terms of people's temporal conditioning, is the perversion of living entities throughout the world feeling this drive to have the actual truth about the relationship with Radha and Krishna shown to them, with the emphasis on their importance, their uniqueness, emphasized, because they need that emphasis there to feel at peace mentally and calm. So what we're seeing now is the millennial generation's entitlement stuff on the illusory external plane consciousness is simply the perverted reflection of many living entities taking birth in these bodies, needing the real pure version of that in Goloka. And that preached to them and confirmed here what they're feeling, they naturally feel inclined towards. Because each one of us is, all living beings are eternally entitled to pure loving affection of Radha and Krishna and others. All living beings are eternally entitled to being valued as the center of everyone else's attention. Because that is what we all eternally do have in reality. And so these millennials that are completely absorbed in this illusory consciousness, they just need their perverted version of what they're inclined towards confirmed to them in the pure version way, in the sense of, in the way that will actually inspire them to go in the right direction towards Krishna consciousness. Because this whole stuff about, you got to give up the ego, blah, 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 this and that, this type of, it doesn't work for this generation of people. Or I should say, it doesn't fully work to actually make an impact on them all the way. Because what they're hearing basically is one thing, and what their inclination is something different. And that inclination, once again, is not only just a temporal illusory inclination, it's an inclination towards their eternal relationship with Radha and Krishna. So that's what they're feeling entitled towards. They just have to be informed of that, accurately so, without all of this contrary stuff coming from other sampradayas and what they're saying about Radha and Krishna and devotional service and things. It's just confusing people, because they're getting one message from us, and they're getting a different message from others, right? And the point is, they're just trying to figure out, okay, well, which set of teachings and stuff is the actual correct set of tenets, or is it all? And see, once again, people just get leaned back to that impersonalistic crap. Oh, is it all just everybody has their own relative ideas then? Oh, ultimately, well, then we'll go back to impersonalism again. No, it's not like that. It's the this generation especially of people need this type of teaching and being talked to like this. They require it, because it is the only thing that actually confirms. Okay, so here's the thing: you confirm the temporal leaning inclination, the validity of it, but in the real way, not in the temporally illusory way. It's like, no, you're not entitled to have everything spoon-fed to you on a plate in a physical, temporal, externalized body. Yes, you have to be grateful. Yes, you have to put effort and work and putting things into making things work out in life. Yes, you have to be a mature adult, etc., on the external temporal side of things. But what you're actually inclined towards is, yes, you are entitled to eternal happiness. Yes, you are entitled to be having love and affection for others shown to you. Yes, 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 you are. And that's true. It's just in the correct perspective. They need to. So basically, it's this entitlement doesn't need to be gotten rid of. It just needs to be shifted to the correct perspective. So they really actually have the valuing of their eternal self down, or they're pretty close to having that down already. All they need to do is shift out of the false ego version of it, and that's it. They'll be all set with that one. And then what'll fill in is giving the loving service to Radha and Krishna and other living beings. That'll fill in there. With right now, we've actually been experiencing the opposite. We've been experiencing, okay, there's a focus on loving Radha and Krishna and others, but there's been a huge lack of valuing one's individual self and uniqueness. Massively. There's been a huge lack of this over the last couple thousand years. So that's going to be a huge aspect to the golden age of Lord Chaitanya coming in, is this emphasis shift. Okay, and how we're experiencing ourselves in relationship to devotional service. Very much so. So when you have an individual who feels valued, who feels important, but not in a superior type way, not in a hierarchical manner towards others, then you have an individual that is able to get so much more done, that's going to feel happier, that's going to achieve great things every day. It's going to have a lot of drive, a lot of masculine drive, and if you're feminine, you're going to have a lot of healthy feminine drive too. So it's going to create a healthy dynamic for everyone. But the key is, it really comes down to correct teachings. It really does. It really does. That everybody can actually agree on as solid facts. Okay, and that's what it comes down to. Period. So, and really, the only single things that I keep speaking against every single time are just things that lead people to have some kind of impersonalistic idea left in the brain. That's it. So it's like literally a handful of things I can count on my hands that are specific points, like the form of Radha and Krishna being the source of the sound vibration that emanates from their form, and not just an aspect of their personality. That's the first one. The second one, that Radha and Krishna are not both personal and impersonal, they're specifically superpersonal, and the impersonal factor is simply them agreeing to people who insist on seeing them that way. They're not actually impersonal, though. That's the second point. The third point is that the idea that the forms of Radha and Krishna are co-equally supreme with their impersonal feature is also erroneous. That's syncretic Brahmavadi. That's what that ideology is. And people mistaking that as being the personal understanding, which it is not. And thinking that that's what the Acharyas taught, which they did not teach that. And also the idea that the living entity started off somewhere in transcendence, not in Goloka, somewhere other than Goloka. That's also an erroneous idea, completely erroneous, and is really, really widespread. Like, it's really getting annoying how widespread that false idea is. It's really people just shooting themselves in the foot and really negating that eternal validity and value they have by thinking they started off like in just consciousness and then they started engaging in activities. Come on, no, that's not how it works. It's not what the Acharyas taught either. The actual Acharyas who didn't deviate, they taught correctly that we're eternally in Goloka, and that's where we go back to. That's it. That's simple. And then number 5 is the importance of each individual living being, infinite uniqueness being the emphasis on what's important in Krishna consciousness, as how we understand what Jivatma means, and the definition of that, and the nature of that. These 5 points are the ones I always am going on and on about, as being, when people preach contrary to any of those 5 points, then those are immediately, you can pinpoint to a minuscule, what do you call it, like a pinpoint degree. You can like specify exactly what the impersonal tinged aspect of what they're teaching is. Like, exactly, you can pinpoint what it is and crush it and defeat it, But, for whatever weird frickin' reason, people keep adhering to those wrong teachings on those 5 things. Like, it's weird. People have some weird insistence on insisting that Radha and Krishna have to be like personal and impersonal both, and that those are just 2 aspects of their personalities, and somehow people not understanding how that's actually impersonalism and thinking that that's personal truth. It's just weird, man. Like, why people keep going back to that shit, the impersonal crap. Like, it's like this obsessive inclination to leave impersonalism as an allowed thing and welcome it in there somehow. It's like, but you don't need to welcome that shit in because it's not accurate. It's just, it always comes down to that. People not understanding that Radha's form is actually supreme. Radha Krishna's forms are actually supreme. If they can't grasp how Radha and Krishna are supreme, then okay, yes, Krishna's form is supreme. All right? People not grasping how that's the case, form specifically supreme, then they don't understand how those things are impersonalistic. They just don't, and they won't, because they're not understanding the actual nature of the form of Krishna. They're thinking his form is a movement, vibrational, personal aspect of the supreme, which is also impersonal. No, it is not also impersonal. He is not also impersonal, never. And if anybody actually reads the purports, they would see this and understand this. But what they do is they read 1 or 2 purports, and then they don't read the other ones altogether as a cohesive whole, so therefore they jump to conclusions. And guys like me are left doing this, constantly having to call out these inaccurate points, which I shouldn't have to be doing this. We could be getting a lot more accomplished if I didn't have to constantly bring this stuff up all the time. If people just understood these things and moved forward with them, right? Then Radha's movement would actually spread faster, which a lot of amazing things have happened on her appearance day this year, but yeah. But all these things will contribute to her movement spreading that much faster, that much quicker, and us getting things done, together. Like, for crying out loud. As devotees, we naturally like to spend time personally, physically, in the sense of physical human bodies being around us alone, in that sense, right? Whereas alone isn't really a thing, but the point is, you get what I'm saying. Like, just, in our own rooms or in our own houses without other people being around or walking around us in human form. And then this tendency is spreading more and more and more amongst devotees worldwide. Now, that's a good thing to spend a lot of time personally just meditating, but the thing is, it's not necessary to be basically in that state because you have to avoid interacting with other devotees because they so strongly disagree with you or something. That part of it's not necessary. Doing that should be 100% only based on you feel enthusiastic to do that because you're experiencing upliftment from Radha and Krishna. So no more of this being isolated or lonely stuff because we feel depressed due to our interactions with devotees. This is ridiculous. This does not need to be happening anymore. And it's just these 5 points. If people just get these 5 points right and start knowing them, believing them, teaching them, knowing that they're for certain, experiencing the fact of these things too, experiencing the truth of these things, then there's going to be a lot more people than just me doing this, saying this stuff, talking about it in videos and whatnot. I want that to be the case. I don't want me to be the only one saying this stuff, talking about it, preaching it. That's going to really annoy me, actually, if I'm the only one doing it. Simply because it's going to be like, God damn it, it's like the second I disappear or go out, it's like, who's going to keep preaching this stuff or teaching it? It's just going to be me only, and then nobody ever teaches it again. It's a concern of mine. It really is. It's like, because I could die today or tomorrow, but it's like, who's going to continue on the teaching? And ultimately that's within Radha and Krishna's control. If they decide that I'm the only one that ever teaches this stuff or goes into it ever, and then nobody else in the future ever discusses it, and they just like throw it in the dustbin of history. Oh, yep, that was Kamadeva Das's weird cult, and then that's they close the book on history there. Okay, that's Radha and Krishna's arrangement. So be it, because my eternal relationship with them is that hidden nature anyway. That dynamic pretty much happens in Goloka with me also. So, same song and dance, different day. But the point is, I really would prefer that not to be the case. I would prefer that people start teaching this stuff in books, in discussions with people personally, face-to-face, in videos, and just all over the place. I would prefer that more people than me start talking about this stuff. Because it is important. Radha and Krishna's forms are important. All these specifics about the valuing of yourself individually, your ego, your real ego, is important. It's all important stuff. So I'm tired of seeing the neglect of these things taking place, the neglect of the real ego of each individual being emphasized. So yes, we do need to stroke each other's real egos. This is a good thing. That's different from stroking each other's false egos. Very different. So praising others, glorifying others, genuinely feeling that towards them also, it's nice. And it uplifts others on a spiritual transcendent level. So because we get all hung up as devotees on all these weird little things. Like, oh, if I praise them too much, they're going to get absorbed in false ego or something. Or if I, show too much love and affection, then they'll misinterpret it. It's just, come on, man. We don't need to worry about that stuff. It's about just showing love and affection to each other and feeling it, And whether that's actually shown or not necessarily through words or actions, the important point is that that's how you feel towards others, Yep. So basically today, because I keep running into this, I guess that's what I keep running into. Devotees keep reporting to me they keep feeling depressed, lonely, all this other stuff over and over again. And then I talk to them, I ask them like very specifics about, okay, what exactly is going on? What is your perspective towards the situations that you're in? And it always comes back to the perspective being off of one of those 5 things we discussed. Like they're for whatever reason, they're not seeing themselves according to the value that they actually have, and or not seeing others according to the value that they have. And so many other things related to those too, right? And that's like the cause of the issues, And it's like when I just feel, I don't know, it's like then I bring up why that's happening. And then the point is like, well, if you do this, you'll experience similar to what I'm experiencing, life going good for you, things working out, etc. Because Radha and Krishna will make things work out for you. They're not going to make your life more miserable if you're doing what's pleasing to them. They're not going to make your life more miserable and intolerable if you're doing what pleases them. That's not how they operate. It's like, that doesn't even make sense why they would do something like that. It's just absurd to think those types of things. Like, okay, the more devoted I am to Radha and Krishna, the more they're going to make my temporal life agonizing or miserable. And it's like, no, the only times they arrange that is if there's some aspect of the person's temporal life that is actually causing a lot of harm towards others, and that is like misleading others really, really bad. Then they do that in those cases for a short amount of time, so it registers to the person, hey, I've been actually really quite an asshole to this group of people, and I need to stop doing that. And then it comes back, right? Then things work out again, right? And I'm saying this as a fact. I'm not saying this as a falsely egoistic, I'm so great thing. I'm saying it because at least I've tapped enough into my real ego to recognize and to feel towards others affection for them in every case, where I just don't feel inimical feelings towards other living beings, okay? I may be furious with what they're doing, actions, of course. Like I'm against castration, I'm against all this stuff. But I don't feel inimicalness towards the persons, though, at all. And I actually feel affection for them. And especially I feel affection for pure devotees, even the ones I call out, points that I disagree with. And because Radha and Krishna know I feel that towards them, I don't ever have to face anything severe, like ever, you know, um, because I feel loving feelings towards them, you know. And of course, you know, out of gratefulness, we see that I could feel infinitely more loving feelings towards them, of course, and that's the focus. But the point is, I analyze my consciousness top to bottom, and a good example is I would never use my free will. It's like not even in my potential to use my free will in a way that specifically finds pleasure in causing injury or pain to others. It's like I have no inclination to do that whatsoever. It's like not even in my consciousness, you know. Yeah, I may be in pain, and in pain want to do justice in the sense of preventing others from being hurt the way I was, sure. But it wouldn't be with the consciousness of I find pleasure in you being tortured as a vengeful result of you harming me. No, that wouldn't be my perspective towards it. It'd just be like, I wish I wasn't harmed, and I wish you weren't harmed either, by me or anybody else. And it'd just be this frustration of being involved in harming others and being harmed. It wouldn't be like a contemplation of. So this is a good example. Like each individual has the potential to use free will within a certain fold, a range, okay, based on their eternal preference and personality, and that's how mine is. I never contemplate anything within the realm of contemplating how can I hurt others or how can I get a one-up on this in the sense of causing them injury. No, I never think that way about stuff. I never have. So, but I can see a person who lacks empathy, like as a part of their psychophysical condition where that's not present, would think in those ways. Or I should say a person who does have empathy having the potential, if they're a different individual, maybe to think like that. But that's the point. It's just, so let's all cut each other some slack. You know what I mean? Let's just be nice to each other and feel affection, and genuinely feel it. Keep it real like that. You know what I mean? Without all this just, because it does get exhausting. Like there's so many wonderful scriptural references and explanations ad infinitum for all these things we're talking about, just elaborations on all the point by point by point. But it's really nice to just rest and relax sometimes, and just focus on the affection directly, because the thing is with all those little specifics and stuff, the point is to get us to that sensation of affection towards others. That's the point of them, right? So it's like, if you can just focus on feeling the affection towards Radha Krishna, towards others, for yourself, right then and there, you're good. And then basically you can have the reference written down or in book form or whatever of all the specific details. Like, okay, you do this at this point of the day, you go through this ritual at this time of day, you do this and this, say this prayer or whatever. It's like, great, wonderful. There is a tool set we can use. Okay? But that's what it is. It's a tool set. It's not the actual goal or the situation. The tool set is meant to be used to achieve what you're trying to build, what you're trying to construct. It's tools. That's it. But in this case, it's not the same. It's not the case of a temporal building. So we don't actually have to build like we build physical buildings. You can get straight to the end right immediately, or you can take a bunch of time to get there. That's the point. So, and I run into this funny dynamic too. It's like, okay, I'll present a video, right? And I'll elaborate on all these specific points. And then in the next video, I'll cover a different series of points. And then the people start asking, then I start getting asked, like as if a person forgot the points I had just covered in the various previous videos. It's like, no, in this video, I'm just emphasizing these points more. I'm not throwing out the window what we just talked about before. In the next video, it's like, yeah, all the same stuff we talked about is still the same things. It's just I'm emphasizing a different aspect of things today, more so than before. So it's like, it's weird. It's almost like people get some strange idea that I'm like changing like what I'm actually teaching or something. When you look at it, no, it's not that. It's like one day I'll emphasize kicking the asses of everybody who's involved in castration and eliminating them from the planet, and then the other day I'll focus on like how we're supposed to love them and every other living entity as pure devotees and see internally and stuff, And then the next day I'll be shouting against the hypocrisy in temporal illusory society, all the stupidity and joking and stuff. Then the next day I'll be going back into the internal meditations, the pastimes of Goloka, things like that. The specifics of form and pastimes, clothing and things like. But the point is, it's all one cohesive whole together. The whole message together. Okay, is that And if you already get it, if you already get that Radha and Krishna's forms are the central focus and fixation, if you're already doing that as your daily focus and fixation anyway, great, you've already achieved perfection in that regards, and your individual level of perfection that you feel you've gotten to or whatever, that's between you and Radha and Krishna. Nobody else can touch that or, delve into it or talk about it, because that's your individual thing with them. It's not determinable by any external source. Even another pure devotee, no other individual Jivatma can determine your level of purity. Period. It's not possible to do that. Only you in your relationship with Radha and Krishna, they understand your level of purity, your intentions fully, where you're coming from, because it's unique to you, the eternal individual. And it's also distinct from your gurus and your spiritual teachers and everything else. Just like they're distinct from you, you're distinct from them. You're friends with them eternally, united with them, but we're all each individuals, okay? And that's the fact. So, let's see, Nicholas. Yeah, you need to get the background presentable. Maybe a large poster of Radha and Krishna, some lighting and stuff, and stick to your class, then answer the questions at the end. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. So I like really good visuals of Radha and Krishna. I'm really picky about that. I want to have like really good, attractive visuals of them. Of course, I have my deities here, and then I have the pictures of Radha in the background, but it's just the setup, basically, what I have to have set up in the room. It's not exactly conducive to 100% how I'm wanting to set it up yet, because since my space is somewhat limited here, I can't like cover this stuff up very well. I have to actually get a physical like poster podium board or something to put in my room. But as far as the walls go, yeah, there's pretty much lined with stuff on all sides. Books, a lot of books, scriptural books and things and stuff like that. But let's see here. Okay. You could draw a chart on different form of personalism. It would be very helpful. Yeah, I will draw a chart on that. I need to actually get a big whiteboard, draw a chart, and then scan. And I transfer that to a paper version too, so I can make copies of it. Yes, I definitely will do that. We're all together in this, brother. Yes, we are, Hedvin. Get a different kind of wide angle. And then, of course, ultimately, at the end of the day, all that stuff has to do with external presentation, method, mode, etc. It really comes down to what the message actually is, what is actually being presented, the substance of what's being presented. So this background behind me could technically be anything. It could be a big trash dump for all I care, or this wall that I have set up here, or it could be the fanciest deity altar in the world, with the most beautiful, elaborate picture ever. At the end of the day, those things are all still externals, and still, if a person's not picking up on what's actually being discussed, they're just not going to pick up on it, because it's an internal affair, not an external affair. So if people get wide-eyed, like googly-eyed, distracted by the externals as the basis of how they adhere or listen to something or whatever, then they're really not going to actually pick up on the substance of what's being taught anyway, They're going to just pick up on the presentation instead of the substance of the presentation. So yeah, that's why I haven't been too obsessively worried about the background, how it looks and everything else like that, because all that stuff will fall into place. I'll have a better situation, better setup soon enough by Radha and Krishna's arrangement to do all that. Like basically a center I can just completely devote to all this stuff. Nice, really clean-cut presentations, nice editing, nice background, nice diagrams, all this other stuff, so everybody can just visually see all the stuff we're talking about. Yeah, that's all to come. But I had a good day today, my friends. I hope this has been a good ego booster for all of you. So continue focusing on your ego, your real ego. Embrace that, indulge, and I will see you next time. Hari Bol, and Hare Krishna.